Dragon and the Young Cooper. One crisp fall day, Jonas, a young cooper, set out into the woods on the slopes of Mount Pilatus. He was gathering long, pliant sticks he would use to make barrel hoops when winter came. He knew that he had to find plenty, otherwise he wouldn't be able to make enough barrels to sell at the spring market after Governor Winkelried took his share. Governor Winkelried was the mean-spirited bailiff in charge of all the surrounding lands. The farmers who lived there had to give part of everything they grew, hunted, or made to the stingy bailiff. Just the week before, Winkelried had demanded double last year's number of barrels. Jonas was so angry that he didn't notice how high he'd climbed until he emerged above the tree line just as the sun was setting. The mountains were very dangerous in the dark. As he turned to hurry downward, Jonas tripped and fell. He tumbled down the steep hillside, scattering the sticks he'd worked so hard to collect. He tried to cry out for help, but banged his head on a rock. Everything went black. Jonas awoke in a cave, feeling very cold and hungry. How did I land here? He wondered. He began to crawl toward the light, knowing he had to get out of the mountains before he froze to death. A shuffling noise made him stop. Turning slowly to look behind him, he saw two shining red eyes. Then he made out two glowing nostrils, a huge head, and a long neck with shining scales. As the head moved towards him, Jonas closed his eyes, certain he was about to be eaten by a monster. But to his great surprise, all the great creature did was to sniff him gently. When Jonas opened his eyes again, the creature had turned away and was licking a thick, whitish fluid from the cave walls. "It's a dragon," thought Jonas, "and it's eating moon milk." The young cooper had heard tales of dragons that lived in the caves of the mountains and of the magic powers that the moon milk gave them. Just then the dragon snorted a small flame, and more white goo began to ooze from the rock. The dragon swung its head and nudged Jonas toward the moon milk. Jonas hesitated, wondering if he should touch it. The dragon nudged him again, and Jonas poked the warm goo with his finger and brought his finger to his lips. His stomach gave a great hungry growl. He leaned towards the wall and began to lap the goo in great gulps. The moon milk was delicious. When Jonas had finally filled his belly, he gave a little burp. He felt very warm and sleepy. He was too tired even to be surprised when the dragon leaned over to lick his face with a big warm tongue. When Jonas woke in the morning, he felt very rested. He stretched and yawned. Remembering all the work he had to do that winter, he crept past the sleeping dragon and poked his head out of the cave. A blast of cold snow slammed against his face. He peered down the rocky slope, but he couldn't see the valley. He had to return home. Jonas began to climb down the slope, but it was very icy and he slipped. Something grabbed the back of his shirt and pulled him back into the cave. Jonas protested, "I can't stay here." The dragon just tugged on Jonas's shirt again, pulling him away from the storm. Jonas looked out once more and realized it was useless. He'd never make it to the valley. The winter was the happiest time of Jonas's life. He ate moon milk and curled up to sleep with the dragon, who was as warm as a furnace. When he wasn't eating or sleeping, he told the dragon about his family and about cruel Winkelried. "He does nothing but sit around all day. Sometimes he even beats the farmers. We're so afraid of him." The dragon watched Jonas, and Jonas was sure that somehow he understood. Finally, one day, the spring sun blazed into the cave, and Jonas could hear birds singing in the trees below. Jonas looked down the steep cliff. The ice was almost gone. It was time to risk the climb. But the dragon crawled to the cave opening. He lowered a wing, and Jonas realized he wanted him to climb on. "Really?" Jonas said. "Is that a good idea?" The dragon nudged Jonas onto his back. The dragon unfurled his wings, and Jonas felt the warm rush of wind as they soared past the mountains glowing in the morning sun. Far below, the houses in his village looked like toys. As they came closer, Jonas could see his mother hanging laundry on a line, children jumping on an old haystack, and his father leading the mule through a field, plowing up the soil for planting. The young cooper whooped with joy. The dragon landed in a meadow thick with the scent of new spring flowers and fresh grass. Jonas slid off the gentle beast's wing. He stroked the dragon's large snout and whispered, "I'll never forget you." Then the dragon flew away, and Jonas ran toward the village. Jonas's mother fell to her knees when she saw her son. His father muttered, "I can't believe it. I just can't believe it." They'd all been sure he'd frozen to death. In celebration of his return, a great feast was set out in the village hall, and everyone in the village gathered to hear the story of the friendly dragon. But just when Jonas came to the part where he climbed onto the dragon's back and flew home, a dark shadow filled the doorway to the village hall. Everyone was silent. "And where are the barrels you owe me?" Governor Winkelried said. "My lord," answered Jonas, "I spent the winter with a dragon in his cave. I was not able to make any barrels, but I'll make it up next year." Winkelried stomped into the hall. No one dared look him in the eye. "Did you say dragon? There's a dragon in my lands?" "A friendly dragon, my lord," Jonas said. A gleam came into the bailiff's eyes. "There is no such thing as a friendly dragon. They are mean and nasty beasts, and anyone who kills one will become famous." He grabbed the young cooper's arm and pulled him toward the door. "You will show me where this hideous beast lives, or I will torch your family's home." No one dared stop Winkelried as he dragged Jonas behind him. But they all came to watch as the bailiff donned a padded shirt, added a layer of chainmail, and then covered it with a thick iron breastplate. Knowing that dragon blood was deadly, he also covered his arms with armor and slipped his hands into heavy gauntlets. Then he wrapped his spear with brambles and sheathed his heavy sword. Jonas pleaded with Winkelried as they climbed toward the dragon's cave. He swore he'd make twice as many barrels in the years ahead, but Winkelried only said, "I don't care about barrels. Do you know how much a dragon's skull is worth?" Finally, they reached a pasture below the dragon's cave. Winkelried shoved Jonas aside and shouted, "Come out, you hideous beast, and face my sword." The dragon peered out of the mouth of the cave. "Fly away!" Jonas called, but Winkelried kicked him in the back. The dragon gave a thundering roar. Above Jonas, Winkelried raised his sword. "Run, Jonas, run!" his mother called. He turned to see his family huddled under the trees, but Winkelried grabbed Jonas and lifted him to his feet. A shadow swept over the field as the dragon spread its great wings and swooped into the sky. With a roar, it breathed a burst of fire into the air. But Winkelried held Jonas up like a shield. "Stupid dragon," he called, "come and get your boy." The dragon dove towards them, roaring, its large mouth wide open. Just as the beast swooped above them, Winkelried threw his spear into the dragon's throat. An anguished scream rose from the dragon. It crashed to the ground so hard that the mountain shook under their feet. Winkelried sprang forward and thrust his sword into the dragon's belly. The dragon was still. Winkelried began to laugh. "I killed it," he shouted. "I killed the vicious dragon. The great Winkelried has killed a dragon." Jonas ran at the evil man, but Winkelried just pushed him to the ground. He lifted his sword and waved it in triumph, shouting, "I am the greatest of the dragon slayers. I'll be remembered for years and years to come." But as Winkelried held the bloody sword high above him, he didn't notice the drop of poisoned dragon's blood sliding down the sword and along his glove. The drop slipped into Winkelried's sleeve. Suddenly the bailiff stopped shouting. He stared at his feet in horror. The bailiff's feet had turned to stone, and the stone was slowly creeping up his legs. "Help!" he cried as his belly turned to stone. Then Winkelried gave one last scream before his face turned to stone. Jonas knelt beside the dragon. He thanked his friend for saving them from the cruel bailiff. His family stepped out of the woods, and together, stone by stone, they buried the dragon under a mound of rock. The bailiff they left where he was standing. As the years passed, the stone that encased Winkelried was gradually covered in moss and vines, and all traces of the selfish, foolish bailiff disappeared. If you ever visit Mount Pilatus, listen carefully. People still say that sometimes at night, when the moon is full, a giant shadow passes across its face, and you might be able to hear the soft sound of wings beating, a whispered hello from one of the mountain's gentle creatures.